That is our partner in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. We were able, through last year's Christmas offering, to invest in a project there, along with several other churches throughout Indiana and the United States, to start a community center in partnership with a local Assemblies of God church. And the pastor of that church, his family has been in that community since the year 700 A.D. I mean, there was no Lafayette in 700 A.D. You know what I'm saying? That's a great partner for us to have. And through that community center, they're starting a food pantry, they're starting child care, and a church. And we get to be a part of that. This year, our project is focused in China. I'll have more information next week about the ins and outs of that. But I hope you're praying about, if you're part of this church, you're praying about how to be a part of that this year, how to touch not only China, but families in our church, through our benevolence ministries, and then also we're receiving money so that we can set aside for obstacles and opportunities in 2019. Well, are you ready for Christmas? When I was a kid, I was really, really, really excited about Christmas. I got some friends who are kind of over the top. I have one friend, every August he sets up his Christmas tree in his office. Seems a little bit far-fetched for me. I got another friend who they set up their Christmas tree at home right around Labor Day. Maybe you're not that ready, but I remember when I was a kid, I had these paper strips. I'd get it at school and I'd put all these paper strips together in a chain link, red and green paper, and I'd take one off each day, and I'd count the days for Christmas. And when it got to the very end of that process, I could hardly sleep. I mean, I was just so excited about it, because I was just like counting down the ways in every way that you can think, and driving my parents crazy. And the thing is, I don't know if you're ready. Maybe you've done all your shopping. Maybe you've got your whole list taken care of. It could be the 11 o'clock service, but maybe not. You didn't come super early. Maybe you've put it off like I have. Maybe you're totally ready. Maybe you've planned in advance. You know what you're having for dinner on Christmas, and you figured it all out. I don't know how well you've planned or how deeply you've planned, but there's someone who's been planning in much more detail for Christmas than you and I have, and that's God. Thousands of years ago, He started making promises about what the coming of Jesus would mean. In fact, a little over 1 million days ago, the words that we're going to read this morning, they were written down and passed on to us. They're found in the prophetic book of Isaiah. Now, maybe you hear the word prophetic or prophecy, and you start to have some skepticism almost immediately. And I don't blame you, because a lot of things that are prophetic or prophecies in nature haven't happened. Maybe you remember, according to the Mayan calendar in 2012, the earth was supposed to end. We're still here. Didn't happen. Or maybe you remember in 1988, a man named Edgar Whisenant, he sold 4.5 million copies. That's a lot of books, a lot of worthless books. He sold 4.5 million copies in 1988 of his book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. And when that didn't happen, he wrote The Final Shout, Rapture Report, 1989. And when that didn't happen, he got a really long title, 23 Reasons Why a Pre-Tribulation Rapture Looks Like It Will Occur on Rosh Hashanah, 1993. And we're still here. Well, those predictions, they're not unique to our time. Think about in the year 500, there was a theologian by the name of Sextus Julius Africanus, and he predicted that in the year 500, Christ would return. Or in 1186 A.D., in Spain, there was a man named John of Toledo. He calculated that there would be an alignment of the planets 7 years from then. It was 1179. In 1186, the planets were supposed to line up. And so he printed pamphlets and he told people all over Europe, and people were whipped up into a frenzy. People were hiding in caves in anticipation of the planets aligning, and they were the emperor of Constantinople even walled up the windows to his palace. In fact, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he called for a day of atonement, and do you know what? Nothing happened. In May 1980, Pat Robertson, on his show, The 700 Club, he predicted this. He said, I guarantee you, by the end of 1982, there's going to be a judgment on the world. And he forecast a Russian invasion of Israel that would become a nuclear holocaust, and that 2 billion people would be dead. It didn't happen. Didn't happen. On September 23rd of 2017, I've got a great uncle. He loves this one. Planet X, planet Nibiru, was supposed to fly in, collide with planet Earth. It was going to be the end of the Earth on September 23rd, 2017, and we're still here. And my concern is that with all these predictions, that we would hear about prophecies and we would be a little more skeptical about them. That's a little bit sad to me. Because the Bible is largely a book of promises. Promises about what's going to happen. Promises about how it's going to happen. And the thing is, in the Bible, if you made a promise and it didn't happen, they killed you. Like that's pretty serious. You didn't just come up with things that could happen, because your life was on the line if it didn't happen. And so that's what's happening when all the prophets in the Bible predict the things that they do. They're doing it risking their own lives if it doesn't happen. They're that certain they've heard from God. And I guess if we had that same policy, if we still killed people for being wrong, we'd end up with a lot less weird books and crackpot theories. But people would take prophets more seriously. But get clear on this today. God speaks. God is alive. God says things about the future, and they happen. And I just say this, whenever you hear somebody predict something about the future, measure it against the Bible. If it disagrees with the Bible, it's not right. Something's off. And if someone is wrong, even once, you probably shouldn't believe them again when they start telling you what's going to happen next week. Well, one of the biblical prophets is a man named Isaiah. We read his words already today. And Isaiah is someone he writes the longest book of the Old Testament. He's the most major of the major prophets. And his book is beautiful poetry. It's very complex and rich historically, theologically, and yet it just says some things that we need to hear. And in the next few weeks, we're going to look at some of Isaiah's prophecies about Jesus. These are written approximately 750 years before Jesus. In the time that Isaiah lived, things were broken, okay? Things were bad and they were getting worse, morally, financially, politically, socially, where Isaiah lived. He lived in a place called Judah. That's where Jerusalem and Bethlehem are. And people were afraid, and their future was uncertain. Does it sound familiar? Kind of sounds like our times. Wars, terrorism, nuclear threats, racial tension, political turmoil, violence, hate. People are afraid, and their future is uncertain. But what Isaiah comes along and says is that there is hope anyway. There's still hope for Judah, and there's still hope for us. And there's hope for us because Christmastime is coming. Now, I'm not talking about the holiday. I'm talking about Christmas. The simple, original fact that God's Son would be sent to earth to be born as a baby, and that the King of Kings would come as a child. He'd grow up in our world. This was God counting Christmas down from way back. Now, most of Isaiah's prophecies to Judah are not very encouraging, I got to tell you. If you start reading Isaiah today, you're going to be like, wow, Pastor's really excited about this. But in Isaiah chapter 9, in a few places throughout Isaiah, things turn bright. And in Isaiah chapter 9, Isaiah starts talking about what the king who's coming, this Messiah who's coming, this promised Savior who's coming, is going to be like. And this is what he says. He says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Now, I want us today to just focus on these first two names of Jesus. We'll start to get a sense of what Christmastime is like and why the promises of God about Jesus are of such significance to us. Now, in those days, it was common to name a king something that would fit with his reign. But normally, a king changed his name after he was king. But these names are given to the king who's coming and kind of ahead of time. And the first thing that he says about Jesus is wonderful. Now, when you hear that, you think, well, that's kind of meaningless, right? Because we've softened the word wonderful. We say, like, ice cream is wonderful, or it's wonderful to see you, or something like the weather is wonderful. We also use the word wonderful in kind of a negative way, right? When your in-laws say, or your cousins say, or whoever, that they're coming with all their kids and they're going to stay for a week at Christmas, what do you say? Wonderful, wonderful. Just the way I wanted to spend Christmas with you and your kids. Yeah. Well, sometimes we get the word wonderful wrong. The Bible has this strong definition for wonderful. Wonderful here in Isaiah, when he says the one who's coming, he's wonderful, he means he's extraordinary. He means, wonderful means, hey, he's coming and he exceeds all expectations. He's marvelous. He is miraculous. He's beyond anything we have ever seen. That's what's meant by wonderful. He's actually more than we could have thought up ourselves or than we would have dreamed was possible. That's who Jesus is. His name is Wonderful. And the word used for wonderful here in Isaiah, it actually appears throughout the Old Testament in Hebrew, of course. And one place that's interesting where it's found is in Genesis 18. Abraham and Sarah, they receive a promise that they're going to give birth to a son. Even though Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90 years old. Sarah laughs about it. She can't imagine that this would actually happen. And she says, listen, will I really have a child now that I am so old? And then the Lord responds to her by using the word for wonderful. And he says, this is how it's translated in Genesis, is there anything too hard for the Lord? That's the word wonderful. That's how the word wonderful is translated there. The idea is when Jesus is coming, it's like his name is anything too hard for the Lord. That's what we mean when we say Jesus is wonderful. Can you imagine that anything would be too hard for God? No. But you can't imagine maybe that he would do any of it for you. But in fact, Jesus is coming for you. He has the capacity to do what's wonderful. This baby is going to be extraordinary and supernatural. And from the very beginning, this baby is for us and beyond us. He's wonderful. And he shall be called Wonderful. And then he picks the next name and he says that Jesus is the counselor. He's going to be called Wonderful Counselor. Now, maybe when you hear the word counselor, you just think of somebody sitting in a very boring room, wearing a sweater, making notes about things you're saying. That's not exactly what this word counselor means in the Old Testament. Maybe you do need a counselor at this time of year, right? Because this time of year brings some unusual stresses. Maybe you're asking yourself, like, how long is your crazy cousin going to stay? Or maybe you've got unrealistic expectations that's tied to Christmas. You know, you want it all to be perfect. You want the gifts to be perfect. You want for the kids to look perfect. You want for the meals to be perfect. You want for everything to happen on time. And everything's going to unroll in this perfect way. And you know what? It probably won't. It's probably not going to happen that way. Or maybe your stress is connected to money. This is an expensive season. Maybe you have guilt because you can't buy the things that you'd like to buy for your family. For many of you, it's a time of increased stress and pressure. You have a lot of extra things to do. I had some kid last year, came up to me in church and said that he was going to have 16 Christmases this year. I don't know how that's possible, but he was going to go 16 different places for Christmas. That's a lot of stress. Maybe you need a counselor at Christmas. And just thinking about a counselor, you might have some ideas about a counselor. Like a counselor might be to you somebody who listens to you when you're going through something, you don't know how to process it. Or maybe a counselor is someone who listens patiently. Maybe a counselor is someone who is going to listen to whatever you've done and not judge you for your thoughts and your actions. Maybe that's what you think about when you think about a counselor. And certainly when you're choosing a counselor, you want to pick someone who's wise. You want to pick someone who's caring and truthful and confidential. But Jesus, think about it. He's much more than a counselor. He's wonderful. He's the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And as you imagine Jesus as a counselor, he's able to offer advice, but he's able to do so much more. This word counselor in Isaiah, in the Old Testament, it actually means one who has plans. One who has plans. So the counselor to a king is someone who knows all the plans. He knows what the plans are in terms of where they're going to build roads and how they're going to finance certain things. He knows the plans involved with treaties with other nations. He knows the plans, the battle plans that are lined up. He knows all the plans in the kingdom. He has inside information about the future. A counselor was a valuable ally. If you knew someone who had the plans, there's no telling what you could get done. With the help of a counselor, you can make decisions not based on what was or what used to be or what currently would be, but you can make plans based on what was coming down the road. A counselor was an advisor who had the plans. And this world's counselors, as wonderful as they are, they have a profound weakness. They're only as good as the information they receive. They can't help you unless they get the true picture. I can't tell you how many people lie in counseling, right? It's the biggest challenge in marriage counseling is that very often somebody is not really saying the whole truth. How in the world can anybody help you when you're not telling the truth? It's kind of like if you went to a financial advisor and you started telling lies about your debt. That person's not going to be able to help you. Even the best counselors, they only know the right questions. But they don't have all the answers. They can't know what's ahead. They don't know what's ahead. But Jesus is different. Jesus is the counselor who not only knows your past, but he has planned your future. He doesn't have an opinion. Jesus has the answer. Jesus knows where your life is going. Jesus can't be shocked as your counselor. He knows what you've done. He knows what's going through your mind. He already knows, and there's nothing in your past that's a surprise to him. Look at this. If you don't know how to deal with your past, that should bring you great comfort, because Jesus knows the mistakes of the past, and he loves you anyway. Jesus knows your hurts from your past, and he can lovingly guide you through them. Jesus knows how your past affects you. Now, you may feel doomed by your past, but he sees far beyond that. He knows the plans for the future. He sees and knows your entire story. And he knows it from beginning to end, and he's for you. Now, where do you get that kind of counsel? Where do you get this kind of advice from Jesus? How is it that you can plug into his ability to know the future and to know the plans for you? This isn't just direction from someone who about how to get somewhere. This is someone who already has been there. It's the direction coming from the person who has made you and knows you inside and out. I love how Psalm 139 says it. Look at these words. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. God knows what makes you happy. He knows where all your buttons are. He knows the things that make you mad. He knows exactly what kinds of things will make you feel honored and what kinds of things will make you feel betrayed. Why? Because he put together your inmost being. He knows who you are inside and out. He says, I praise you because I am fearfully, and here's this word again, wonderfully made. God made you. Nothing's too hard for him. Your works are wonderful. There's that word again. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. You know, you were when you were being made, before anybody actually even knew you were there, God knew you were there. God was putting you together. It says, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God knows the plans for you ahead of time. God knows what's going to happen, what's going to roll out of your life. And then I want you to consider this, because a lot of us, we think about God, we think about him as so distant and cosmic. But what the Bible makes clear for us over and over, and what it says right here, is that actually God is also nearby. He is intimate with you. He knows what's going on with you. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. God has so many thoughts about you as an individual. God knows where you've been. He knows where you're going. And he's thinking about you. And how vast are the thoughts that God has for you? He says that were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. Now, if I brought a glass jar full of sand, I'd have, I'm sure, tens of thousands of grains of sand. But that would just be like a tiny amount compared to the grains of sand in the world. And what does he say here? He says God's thoughts for you would outnumber the grains of sand in the world. And so the one who made you, the one who knows where you've been and knows where you are and knows where you're going, he can't stop thinking about you. He has more thoughts for you than you have seconds that you're alive. That's what the Word of God says here. And you know, he's coming to be your counselor. David ends his thoughts here. He says, when I awake, I am still with you. In other words, even when I'm sleeping, you're thinking about me, God. Jesus knows the path you need to take. He prepared the path before you were ever born. He knows the outcome of your choices, the good ones and the bad ones. He's wonderful, and He's your counselor. And you don't need an appointment with Jesus. He's always there. You don't have to worry if He's going to take your insurance. He's got you covered, right? You can have free, unlimited daily visits, 24/7 access to Jesus. He can be counted on. Jeremiah 33:3, one of my favorite verses in the Bible. God invites us, He says, "Call to me, and I will show you amazing things you never knew." God is your counselor. God can be called on. Jesus comes as the one who knows the plans. Now you might think, that's wonderful, but how can I tap into that? How can I know what it is that Jesus wants to tell me? How can I know the inside information that Jesus has for me? Well, there's some simple things. The first is start with His written plan, the Bible. God has some specific plans for you. And the Bible addresses all kinds of dimensions of your life. Your relationships, your marriage, your money, your job. You go on and on and on. The Bible addresses it in some way. And in order for you to know God's plans, this is the most basic place for you to start. Most practicing Christian millennials, those are the youngest adults, youngest generation of adults among us, they say that reading the Bible is the most important spiritual discipline. But when they do surveys among this group, even though they say Bible reading is the most important thing, it comes in third place after worship and prayer. Only 14% of adult Americans read the Bible every day. Only 14%. Yet 3 out of 5 say they wish they spent more time reading it. The Bible is our guidebook for living. The Bible has the answers that you're looking for. You just might not like the way that it answers your questions. You can read His instructions for you on your attitudes, your words, on resolving conflict, on how He sees your past. If you've never really read the Bible, I just have some simple directions for you. The first is, find a simple version you can understand. Don't get guilted into feeling like you need to read a certain version of the Bible. There's a lot of great translations out there. But find one you can understand and then start reading in 2 places. Read in the Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's at the beginning of the New Testament. And read from the book of Proverbs. There's 31 of them. Pick one for every single day. And before long, God's plans will start to be known to you. Another place where you can look for God's plans is in prayer. That's to pray. So when you don't know what to do, turn first to Jesus. Spend some time every day talking with your counselor who can be trusted. You don't need to use fancy words. Just tell him what you're feeling and then listen. Be quiet. Sense what he might be saying to your spirit. Experience the peace that comes from being in His presence. This Wednesday night, we've got this worship and prayer night. That's one of the reasons we're offering a worship and prayer night, is because the more that you will pray, the more you'll start to tap into the counsel that God has for you. And the last thing that I think of when it comes to tapping into wonder and counsel is to be close to His people. Be close to His people. A lot of Christians make the mistake of thinking that they will go on, continue following Jesus without being connected to a church. And I want to challenge you in this today. It will not happen. You are not an exception. Study after study has demonstrated that practicing Christians who stop going to church, they become less likely to engage in other faith-related activities. And so what does that mean? That means that when you stop going to church, you're going to stop reading your Bible. When you stop going to church, you're going to stop praying. When you stop going to church, you're going to stop giving to God. When you stop going to church, you're going to stop sharing with other people about Jesus. When you stop going to church, you're going to stop looking to God altogether at some point. Decide today that you're going to make being with the people of God a priority. That nothing else is going to get in the way of that. Because there are some impacts that this has on your life. Real practical things. Look how the book of Proverbs says it. I love what it says. It says, walk with the wise and become wise. Walk with the wise and become wise. The wisest friends that I have, they've made me better. And you know what? The same is true in your life. If you'll spend time here getting to know some wise people, and there are plenty of them, people who look to God, people who have arranged their lives around Him, people who've discovered over following God over a long period of time in their life that He can be trusted, and they'll point you in that direction every time. Guess what? It'll start having an effect on you that's positive. So this is a way for you to tap into God's counsel and wonder, is through God's people. So stay connected to the local church. You know, some of you here today, you've gone to all the wrong places asking for advice. You talk to people and you recognize they don't have very good answers. Some of you have gone and you have sought out advice from a bottle. You sought out advice from other kinds of pleasures. And I want you to hear today, those things, they'll never counsel you into the kind of life that you're wanting to lead. But today, Jesus comes to you as the source of all the answers, as the ultimate source of truth. How amazing it is to know that Jesus is always available. How amazing it is to know that Jesus comes with a clear vision of your future. That when you ask Jesus, He'll always give you the right answer. My friends, this Christmas we're waiting on someone who's wonderful. We're waiting on a counselor who has all the plans.